So I'm not exactly sure what's going on with it. Over on YouTube, for anybody who's watching, I'm going to have I'll have website up that we're talking about today. And we'll be over a couple of different things with them. So if you're just tuning into my lives and this is the first time you're in here, I am Widda. I am an archaeologist and an anthropologist, a historian, storyteller, and a healer. And I use TikTok to share educational information because of the fact that education is really gatekept in the United States. And with the gatekeeping that we have within the United States, it means that many people in marginalized communities don't get a full education. And to kind of give information that's kind of being kept from everybody, I utilize the education that I have due to the military and due to being able to use that to get degrees and use that information so that other people have a share of information. I came into TikTok specifically for a couple of reasons. The first one being the fact that I was asked to help people who are of purely European descent who are looking for ancestors to try and find their own roots and try to find their own connection, how to find their indigenous or ancient ancestors within European roots. So that people aren't culturally appropriating Turtle Island indigenous ancestry or Turtle Island indigenous behaviors or other behaviors. And also because I have information that I want to get out there, right? There's a lot of stuff that many of us don't seem to understand or don't seem to have the access to and understanding of. And because of the way the world works, a lot of the shit that we're being indoctrinated into is a crock. And I want to try and get out some different information, mainly for our own good, right? Because a lot of the stuff that we're being indoctrinated into really harms us, and trying to let people see just how amazing that we really are, and the positives of us, right? And then as I've come in and as I've been working, I've been asked by many other members of many different communities to also make sure I'm doing, I've been tasked with the job of ensuring that this education is getting out there for other people, just because of the fact that there's a lot of people out there who do not have easy access to a lot of education. And again, that tends to be marginalized communities that do not have educational access because of the gatekeeping within our society and the racism within our society. And so trying to give some of that information to our different communities so that we are stronger and better able to counteract some of the actions that are coming against our communities. And so that's some of the reasons I'm here. If you're just tuning in, I'm going to go ahead and share out the live today. I did not share it out as I got started, but I want to go ahead. I'm trying to see how the feed is going, and currently it's still giving me problems. I'm not exactly sure what the heck is going on with me on TikTok, but I have noticed that it's been a little bit buzzy in here, like it's been a little bit pausy in here, and then we're still pretty low. But I'm going to try my dog. Listen, Mom, you don't get your own space. It's just wrong. You just don't get your own space. It just doesn't happen. You have animals. So as we are discussing today, we've been discussing Homo erectus pretty thoroughly, though we've come up with some other concepts and we've been talking about some other stuff as well. I am kind of back on Homo erectus as I restart a new account, which is what this is, so that I can reach as many people as I can with the base link, the base information about Homo erectus and about our species and about how our species are coming into play, because a lot of the base information really puts a lot of knowledge into the other information as we go on and as we go through and move forward. And so I want to, oh, good God, me and TikTok just never get along. Want to make sure that I am reaching as many possible people with the information as I possibly can, and that all information is going out as that everybody's having all the basics. So within that, I find it really important to talk about a couple of different things. I think the first thing that we should start with, it's really, we're still like only 2 people in here, and I've been going for probably 10-15 minutes. Maybe not quite that long. Trying to do different things to try and figure out exactly what it is that is like, not like why TikTok is not TikToking me. So I'm trying to figure out exactly what it is that's going on, and I haven't quite figured it out yet. The other day when I was in my car, it seemed to work, but I don't really think it has to do with because I have full bars on everything, so I don't really think it has to do with that. Like, it went up the other day when I was in the car. So really, again, I might have to re-download it again. But let's go ahead and start with some basic, not basic, but some, just a couple of ideas and concepts, basically, or rather knowledges that should be much more common than they actually are. And so with that, I want to go ahead and start with kind of a mini vocab lesson. I don't have my office anymore, so everything is animal friendly constantly. A little bit of a mini vocab lesson. So I want to start with just a couple of ideas. First, we have, like, if you're going to look at the modern day understanding of certain things, they might give you a different knowledge, the modern day definition, than what the original definition of words are. And then it's important to understand that the definition of certain words changes depending on what you're talking about, right? Whether or not you're working within a scientific field or whether or not you're working within what they might call a layman's field, right? So when we look at words like tribe, they've come to mean many different things within society today, yet the word tribe is a word that comes from the ancient Latin, and it literally means a community based on genetic lineage. And as a word that's coming from the ancient Latin word, it is a word that was first used to be attributed to, or was first attributed to or used for the tribes of the Italian peninsula, the Italian tribes. The Italian people are actually a tribal people originally. And so the Italian tribes, and actually even up through ancient Rome, it's a very tribal community. A tribe is a community based on genetic lineage, which means that your citizenship within the community is based on your genetic lineage. And a band is a community where your citizenship is based on the need of the community and the need of the individual, not based on genetics, right? So a really easy way to differentiate these two things is that a tribe would be the tribes of Israel. Your communityship, your citizenship within Israel is based on your genetic lineage. And you can see that even today, if somebody is a Judaic human being who is born a Judaic human being, they have citizenship in Israel, even if they've never stepped foot in the state of Israel, right? Whereas the United States is a band, we have people here from all across the globe, and their citizenship is based on the needs of the country and the needs of the person, right? And it can be one or the other or both, right? It can be like we have people who come to our country because they need to get out of, say, Russia, but they are, say, genetic engineers. And so the United States needs more genetic engineers. So they bring in somebody who needs to leave Russia. So they need this community, but they're bringing in somebody who's got skills that match the needs of the community, right? So a community based on the needs of the community and the needs of the individual is a band, whereas a tribe, where citizenship is based. not just the community itself, but where citizenship is based on the needs of the community and the needs of the individual is a band. And a community where the citizenship within the community is based on the genetic lineage is a tribe. And we see even with ancient Rome, which Rome is where we get the word tribe, because the word tribe comes from the Italian people, and the Italian people are the Latin people are the Romans, right? They are one of the tribes of Italians, and they were the tribe of Italians who conquered all the other Italians and then started conquering the whole fucking globe, right? So even within that, within ancient Rome, your citizenship within Rome was based on your genetic lineage. If they conquered another area, you could not be a citizen of Rome unless you were like created a citizen of like your, God, the terminologies are going to be hard for me. I'm going to use the word principality because that's the wrong word, but I can't think of the right word for a group. No, it's not. What is it? A client king. So even if you were a member of a community whose community was under clientship to Rome, you are not a citizen of Rome. You are a member or a citizen of that client community, i.e., if you are an Iceni person, you are of the tribe of the Iceni based on your genetic lineage. And even though the Iceni are conquered by Rome and Rome controls the Iceni people are not citizens of Rome. To be a citizen of Rome, one had to have the genetic lineage, the patronym, the family line to be a citizen of Rome. And so we see that a tribe is a word based on ancient Latin thought process. It is attributed first to the Latin people. It is attributed first to the Italians. And that is attributed, or it is something that is carried on down through Rome as Rome becomes the dominating Italian tribe and starts controlling the Italian region, right? The Latin tribe, and starts controlling the Latin region. So within that, this is two different words that are often used today for many different things that aren't what they're originally attributed to. And a lot of times these words are, we're kind of gaslit as to what these words mean. And we're kind of told that these things mean something that they just really don't. Like we now associate tribal with being of a primitive group, where tribal is not. Right? Tribal, again, if we're looking at the word itself as just citizenship in a community, right? It is not what the community is. There are tribes across the globe whose societal behavior is completely different, and they're still a tribe because their community is based on genetic lineage. Another thing that I like to talk about, and another thing that I think is important, is that when we go outside the US, the term native and the term indigenous mean two completely separate things. Within the U.S., the United States, our indigenous people are what we call our Native American people in the terminology of the United States, right? So indigenous people to North America are considered to be Native American. Yet within the global scale of definitions, and definitions on a global scale, the word native and the word indigenous are two different things. This is seen really eloquently when we look at Sweden. It's one of those places that makes it kind of easy for me to define. When you look at these definitions by the UN, an indigenous group is a group who has connection to the land that they occupy, right? That their spirituality and their community is based on connection to the land. They're also the first arrivers in an area. Now, this doesn't always mean like that they're the area that they're in, right? Like say Oklahoma, right? The Cherokee were not the first arrivers in Oklahoma. There are other nations from Oklahoma, right? The Cherokee nations were more along the eastern seaboard than they were over in Oklahoma. The reason that they're over in Oklahoma is because of forced removal, right? That doesn't make them any less indigenous, right? They have a space that they, had lived in for thousands and thousands and thousands of years before Europeans arrived. They have been moved, right? That doesn't lessen their indigeneity, right? Excuse me one second. I know you wanted out 5 seconds ago and now you want in. So on a global scale, when we look at the term Indigenous on a global scale, what the term Indigenous is a group that is carrying on their ties to the land and their life ways over thousands of years. They maintain their ancient ties to the land. Now, many people like to say things like, well, that means that you can't live in houses, which is completely untrue since most indigenous groups have houses anyway, or communities had houses anyways before Europeans arrived. But they like to say things like that, or, well, why are you driving a car, right? The thing is that being indigenous doesn't mean that you don't continue to grow, that you don't continue to adapt, right? It means that you're maintaining your connection to the ancestral thought process that your community has, and that you're maintaining connection and spirituality with the land. Let me go ahead and pull up the actual definitions. And I froze. We'll come back. I just don't get it. I don't know what to do. I've tried everything. I just don't know what to do with the system. I'll be right back. I'm going to try and see one more thing and see if I can fix it. Hey, over on YouTube, I'm working on trying to see if I can fix this and make it to where it's actually working, because it's once again just not working over on TikTok. And I'm not exactly sure what it is that it is not working that's causing this issue. Let me try and uninstall and reinstall again and see if by uninstalling and reinstalling again, I can get it to work. I'm not exactly sure why. It's just not fucking working for me these days. When we're looking at these things, this is one of the later studies on what has been happening in our understanding, which I find really fucking cool. Watch him signing into the wrong TikTok account. Yeah, no, this is the wrong account. I hate this shit. Sorry, I am so crappy at trying to use these things that now I have to figure out how I need to get into the right account. Because, you know. Hey, sorry everybody. I'm trying to get this thing to work. My patience these days is really fucking low too, which is just not helping. My patience has been, I've got so much going on and my ADHD is not fucking going well with it. So I've tried to reinstall and I'm hoping that that will give some help over here. I just don't even know what's going on. And let's see if that'll work. Why are you all over me, little girl? You're just all over me. It doesn't seem to be. You know, it tells me to swipe to see the real-time performance, but it won't actually like let me swipe it for some reason, and I don't know why. Okay, so as I was stating before it decided to freeze on me, when we're looking at hold on, let me get back into my place. I apologize. I was speaking on one thing, and now I have to figure out exactly where I was speaking on the one thing I was speaking on. Because we had shifted from, okay, that's where we were at. And I'm looking over here because I'm trying to pull up a definition for you. There is an actual written out by the UN concept. Here we go. So the UN definition of what the word indigenous is indigenous communities, peoples, and nations are those which, having a historical continuity with pre-invasion and pre-colonial societies that developed on their territories, consider themselves distinct from other sectors of society. From other sectors of society now prevailing on those territories or parts of them. They form at present non-dominant sectors of society and are determined to preserve, develop, and transmit to future generations their ancestral territories. I'm going to kick you out of the house for the rest of the day, and then you're not going to come in no matter how much you scratch at my back door. 5 minutes ago. Literally. Go. In 5 minutes, he'll be at the back door again. Okay, so this historical continuity may consist of the continuation or for an extended period reaching into the present of one or more of the following factors. Now, this is how the UN themselves define people as belonging to an indigenous community. This is how, like the Comore or the Welsh are working on being recognized as an indigenous community. The Sami are recognized as an indigenous community, and they're recognized as an indigenous community because of this within the UN. Okay, so an occupation of ancestral lands, or at least a part of them, common ancestry with the original occupants of the land, culture in general or in specific manifestations such as religion, living under a system, membership of an indigenous community, dress, means of livelihood and lifestyle, language, whether used as the only language, as mother tongue, as habitual communication at home or in family, or as the main preferred habitual, general, or normal language, residence in certain parts of the country or in certain regions of the world, other relevant factors. On an individual basis, an indigenous person is one who belongs to the indigenous populations through self-identification as an indigenous group consciousness and is recognized and accepted by these populations as one of its members, acceptance by the group. This preserves for these communities sovereign right and power to decide who belongs to them without external interference. Now, this is one of those things that we see a lot within the US when we're talking about sovereignty. It's important to allow not allow, because I don't like the way that sounds. It's important to recognize that nations have the right to decide who is a member of their nation. My grandmother was a member of a nation. I'm not a member of a nation, so would not claim membership in that nation. For while my grandmother was a member in that nation, I'm not. I'm not claimed by the nation, so I should not morally claim that nation. It would not be appropriate, right? So it is important for us to recognize that sovereignty is an important thing for any indigenous nation. Sovereignty is an important thing for an individual. We have individual sovereignty too, right? And that is important for ourselves as well. It's a part of our autonomy, right? We need to make sure that we recognize the need for indigenous nations to have that as well. Hello, Miranda. So let's look at what native means on a global scale as compared to what indigenous means on a global scale. Now, I remember this kind of, but I'm going to pull it up so I can make sure that I am getting the correct definition per UN standards. Okay, so within the UN, the difference between native and indigenous is, again, indigenous community is one that maintains ancestral connections to land, one that maintains ancestral or spiritual connections, societal connections, like their societal and spiritual connections are woven with the land, and they have continuity in space, right? Now, native people, when we're looking at something like Sweden, the Swedish people are the native people of Sweden, and the Sami people are the indigenous people of Sweden. Now, if you're in America, you might be going, what the fuck the difference is, right? Like, because we call our indigenous people our native people here in the United States, right? So for Sweden and for many places across the globe, any place that, well, really any place outside the United States, the term native and the term indigenous are two separate terms that apply to, they're as much about the way that the current society is run as they are about the ancient society, right? So within Sweden, the Swedish are native because they have been there as long as the indigenous people. They are the controlling government, and they no longer maintain their ancestral connection to the land. And so they are the native group within Sweden, whereas the indigenous people within Sweden, the Sami, have been there as long as the native people, and they have maintained their ancestral connection to the land, and they have maintained their ancestral ties to the land, and they keep that their spirituality, their community, their sense of who they are is connected to the land, right? And they're not the predominant or governing nation within Sweden. And so for me, the definition really rings the easiest within Sweden, because you native, the Swedes, and indigenous Sami is pretty clearly shown and defined. We are looking at an area where the two different communities arrived in the area at roughly the same time. We're looking at 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. You see that the Sami come from the northern regions because they're coming over from Siberia, and the Swedes come from the southern regions because they're coming up from the Mediterranean. We actually know that the Sami coming over from Siberia at that time were light of skin and dark of eye, and that the Swedes coming up from the Mediterranean were dark of skin and light of eye at that time period. And so we can actually see through genetics how they changed over the course of time within the region. And we can actually see the distinguishing and distinctiveness between the two communities as they have translated that down. Now, there has been a lot of, up until the Christianization of Sweden, right? The Christianization of Scandinavia, the intermixing between the Sami and the Swedish was really, really prevalent, right? There was a lot of interconnectedness between the two different communities within Sweden. It was not until the Christianization where the Sami started to get pushed out of the regions that they had occupied ancestrally and pushed north into what are Sami lands now, right? Sami. and the native Swedes, those who are the native group within Sweden, started taking over a governmental structure that pushed the Sami into a marginalized area, right? So this is actually at the time where the definition of indigenous and native would start to actually take effect, right? Because at this point, the Swedish people are losing their connection, their ancestral spiritual connection to the land, right? So that part that makes indigenous people indigenous is kind of going. And yet at that time, we are still looking at two communities who were arriving at the same time, who had lived there for the same amount of time, who had the same time frame of connection and the same time frame of thought, right? Again, being native outside of the United States is somebody who has been in that area as long as any other community has been in that area, yet they are a member of the dominant governance in that area, and they are no longer maintaining their spiritual connection to the land in the way that an indigenous group is maintaining their spiritual connection to the land and to the ancestors, their societal connection to the land and to the ancestors. And they are the marginalized group within, or the marginalized community within a country. So this is outside the United States, what the difference is between being indigenous and being native, right? It is only, again, within the United States that we see native and indigenous conflated into the same thing, okay? Then this has a lot to do with the racism and the structural. Yes. And indigenous is in many places a political term to protect rights, culture, and language. Very, very, very much so. And using the terminology of indigenous really doubles that down for indigenous communities across the globe. Very much so, though, when we're talking in Scandinavia, the Sami, many people do not understand that the Sami are still facing horrific racism, right? They're still facing horrific structural racism within their indigenous spaces, right? They have been pushed out and marginalized into a specific space, right? That is now their space, but they've been removed from spaces that were ancestrally theirs as well. And that the UN terming groups as indigenous is actually, for very many people, a protective thing, right? It is to make sure that groups who are being harmed get less harm, or at least there's awareness, right? Many people aren't aware that within Sweden, they had residential schools for the Sami, right? And it is when the UN starts stepping in and starts saying, hey, listen, we're not, we have to protect. Oh, I believe that. I haven't looked at Norway as much as I have at Sweden, because the graves that I study are in Sweden. And so I haven't looked as much in Norway. Absolutely. But I absolutely believe that Norway is still committing human rights violations. And I mean, really across the globe. I mean, there is not a single government across the globe that has indigenous nations within their borders that is not committing atrocious human rights violations against those indigenous groups within their borders. And again, part of the UN defining indigenous groups is supposed to be to protect those indigenous communities from some of the human rights violations that are going on. That doesn't mean it happens. Damn, yeah, I'm totally down. I do not know enough about Norway, so please educate. Much love, beautiful. It's good to see you.
Currently Norway is committing human rights violations against the Sami people up in Sapmi. They put up a windmill park in reindeer herder country.
Oh, good goddess.
The Supreme Court has ruled it to be human rights violations. Hi, Safar. And of course, our government is being a government and saying, well, it's there now. So
yeah.
And for the colonization of Sapmi started by the coastline, Sami people weren't, organized the same way. And so the Norwegian people moved from the coastline up or into the country, and the Sami people just moved further into the country, right? And then from 1600, early 1600, I would say late 1500, but people are arguing about that, and all the way up till even now. But especially back then, eugenics. The Sami people here was subjected to eugenics. They were stripped. They were measured. They were raped. They were moved from their families, moved into residential schools, into proper Norwegian families. They were forced into, many of them were forced into extreme Christian religion called Lestatianer, where, there's no, it's, I think many of the rules are like what's that group in the United States? The ones who
The
live by the
Amish?
land.
The
They
Amish?
can't, yeah.
Yeah.
So no singing, no listening to music, wearing skirts. They're not allowed to ride a bike. Yeah. And of course, the shaming. The Norwegian government, well, the Danish-Norwegian crown, one should say, banned their clothes, their drums, their songs. They have the song they have is called Yoik, and it's very beautiful.
It is.
And it's not about something. It is something. So when they yoik, they would yoik a mountain, for instance, or they would yoik a person, or they would yoik a bird, or they would yoik the wind, or and it's still ongoing. Even today, some of the churches up north, they are not allowed to yoik in church, and that's on colonization and forced Christianization. So now we see the younger generations are taking back their culture, and their language, and they're standing up for their own people. Awesome. Not that it helps much with a government that doesn't care, but it's slowly changing. The further up north you get, I think the more racism towards the Sami you get. Not that it doesn't exist down here. It absolutely does. So don't negate what I'm saying. Like, don't say, oh, you said. No. It does. But like the area where I'm in, I know, because and that's another thing. It's the same stereotypes about Sami people as indigenous people in Turtle Island, right?
Yeah. A lot of them.
Yeah.
I find, to me, it seems like a lot of the, and I don't want to say that, I don't want to make it even, I'm not trying to even it, right? It's not even, right? I do feel like I see that a lot of the same things happened though, right? It may be in different scales or in different ways. So I'm not trying to say it's an even thing yet. And I say that because I've had Sami people state that they don't want it to be stated as an even thing with what happened to Turtle Island Indigenous people. Sami people believe that what happened in Turtle Island was worse. And so I want to make sure that that is stated, right? I still see that the residential schools, the use of eugenics was very much the same, and the way that it was done was very much the same, and the trying of like you're talking about, not being allowed to sing, not being allowed to drum, we were denied powwows for a long time, things like that. I see that there is a lot of very similar happenings happening. And again, I don't want that to come across as me saying that they're even, just that the way that it's conducted is in a very similar manner to try to oppress.
Well, we can say though, instead of saying even, the fact is that the thought of eugenics and the thought of supremacy and colonization were the same here as over there. Right. So of course there's going to be similarities, right? Because they're using the same system to oppress people and to create differences. Right. Now, they were never sorry. they were never, able to find these differences because there is none, and we know that, right?
Right.
And so the the idea that the Sami people are Siberian is actually back from there, because they couldn't find a difference really. So what they did was put them in, like, saying no, but they're Siberian, so they don't belong here.
Right. That makes sense.
And people are still like hung up on that shit. This was the 1600s. Like, listen, come on, what? Yeah. And there's absolutely still shame, especially with the older generation. And there's still struggles. And there's a lot of people in Norway, in Sweden, and Finland also, that don't even know that they are Sami because of the shame. So their families assimilated, and they have no idea.
Yeah.
And now more and more people are taking DNA tests, and what do you know? Like, suddenly you pop up with 85% or something, and they're like, wait, what? And it was their grandfather or great grandfather. You don't have to go further back than that, right?
Yeah, I believe that.
My grandmother's generation, there was still shame, and also the same with Roma in Scandinavia.
Yeah. Well, and I think that really, a lot of people don't know, like, I know in Sweden, one of the first schools for eugenics was started in Sweden, right? Eugenics is extremely prevalent here in the United States. Like, its start was extremely prevalent here in the United States. And I want people to understand that, like, some of our founding fathers founded eugenics. And I can't remember the names off of the top of my head because I learned that 20 years ago. And so I'd have to go and remember the names before I stated them. But some of our founding fathers helped found eugenics. And so a lot of it does start here within the United States. And I want us to make sure that we're aware of that as humans, just because of the fact that we like to try and think that it's not us here in the United States. And so it's really important to understand that a lot of it starts here, and a lot of like Hitler's concepts start here and stuff like that. It's also important to understand that across the US, yeah, really, that's interesting, Salty. Did I just... let's see. I think and I'm going to try it like this. Let's see if I can come back in. I know that TikTok and me have been having some issues. It did not. It kicked. Shit. I'm so sorry. No, you're still there. Ha 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 ha. Yay. Sorry. I thought it kicked you. I was like, well, TikTok has been giving me issues. That's all. I mean, not awesome, but that's an awesome knowledge, I guess, is the best way to put that. Like, it's not awesome that that's where it was, but that's a really cool knowledge. That it starts.
The I think his name is Hans Fredrik Blumenbach. He's the German that went to. No, it's not Johanna. I think. I don't think it's Johannes. The one in Sweden is a different one. I don't know about the one over there. Yes, he was in Georgia, and this is the thing, though. He was there in the Caucasus Mountains, or the Caucasus area, right? And he found this skull that he thought was very beautiful, and this is how the white people got their the name Caucasian. It has nothing to do with white people. It was actually a Georgian, and the only place using Caucasian for white people today is actually United States or North America. Yeah, because it's been done over and over and over again, and helps erase the Caucasus, the people of the Caucasus and their culture, which also many of them should be considered indigenous people. Absolutely. Well, and I think, like, so they had like 5
classifications based on region and mainly based on color of anything more than anything else. And Caucasian wasn't even Northwest Europe, right? Like it was.
No. So it went, from North Africa
Mm-hmm.
and up into Middle Europe.
Yeah.
Back then, and it was all like it was. It didn't matter that the color wasn't the thing; it was the area, right?
Yeah.
So it's all.
I always laugh about that one because people are like Caucasian. I'm like, Caucasian's pretty brown. I mean, like, technically, Caucasian's pretty brown.
Yes.
and yeah, it's a really weird. Well, it's a really weird concept, anyways. The classification of us based on somebody else's, measurements or paint chips. I think that's the one that always gets me like the most, is that they are literally taking sheets of paper where they've painted colors of swatches on and they're holding it up to people's. And I knew that this happened across the board, but actually you see this, and there's a movie called Saw Me Blood. And the movie Saw Me Blood actually shows this. It's showing a residential school in Sweden, and it's showing them like stripping a teenage girl. God, I think she's like 13, 14 in the movie, right? And stripping her down and taking measurements of her. And it shows by putting this piece of paper next to her face and like this thing of eyes with different colors of eyes. And they're like, and all of these different measurements to try and define where we're going to put you. Let us define who you are. I'm going to define for you. You don't get the definition yourself, and let me define on stuff that has nothing to do with you. And I can totally believe that. And honestly, it happens here even. Like the measurement stuff still kind of happens today in some schools, right? Like that concept that, we're going to, and they do it under the guise of we're teaching why these things are wrong. And yet sometimes they still don't quite get that thought process through it, right? Yeah.
Right. So the last lobotomy in Norway was on a Roma man in 1982. That's the year I'm born.
I wonder. Because I think they still do. Yeah, that's last recorded. Yeah, they say that they ended here in the 60s, but I think that they ended after that. I know they do things like they state that forced sterilization of Indigenous women ended in 78. And yet I'm 40. I was born in 78, and I know women my age who were forced sterilized. So, like, I think there's
on TikTok all the time by Indigenous women, not even knowing, and if you don't know, it's forced.
Yeah. Well, and we can say that the actual tie you down kind of force is gone, yet that doesn't mean that there's not still force. I know people who aren't allowed to leave with their children unless they do things, and that is 100% forcing you to do something. If I'm withholding your children from you until you do something, that I am 100% forcing you. So there's
and not asking consent is also forced,
right? 100.
So if you do that, your doctor do that without you knowing, it's still forced.
100%. And I was amazed. We were up in arms, and we should be, about what happened in the migration or the migratory camps, right? Or not the camps, the border. But I just want to say concentration camps because that's really all it was to me, right? But the spaces where they put people trying to cross the border in the South, there was this huge thing in like 2021 where they were talking about how they forced sterilized and did forced hysterectomies on a bunch of women crossing the borders. And the thing is I'm sitting here going, well, it's not like we aren't already doing that. Like that's something that we do to most of the women that look like that. It really has to do with us judging that face shape and deciding, or it's right there.
And when it's not forced sterilization, it's making sure people don't get the necessary medical attention when they're pregnant and during their birth. Now we have a lot of dead women.
Yeah. And that's huge too. That's huge.
Yes.
Medical racism, especially in maternity, is huge here within the United States, and huge. Yeah. Yeah. I think what astounds me is not, I'm astounded that it's still happening, obviously, right? I'm astounded that shit still happens, right? It astounds me that we have been able to create a world where the vast majority of people don't know these things, that it's
propaganda.
Yeah, and it's propaganda. It's through indoctrination. It's through gaslighting and whitewashing history. It's through a whole bunch of these different acts, and yet there's a constant innuation of people who are like, I'm ignorant and I want to stay ignorant. Stop telling me shit. I just want to be ignorant.
Ignorance is bliss. And sometimes I have to agree. Sometimes I wish I didn't know the shit I know, because my heart are breaking in thousand ways, right? There's nothing I can do. Like, I'm just one. I'll do whatever I can, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm not someone who can make a decision and change something. Would I not want to know this information? No, I wouldn't. But at the same time, yes, sometimes I'm thinking, must be fucking nice, though, to be so ignorant. You have no idea what's going on in the world around you. You're just in your own fucking bubble, do your own la thing.
Right.
What a privilege to have.
Well, the lack of stress alone would fucking make my life better, right? Like the lack.
Yes.
I sit frozen half the time over how much trauma there is in the world around me. If I didn't know about it, maybe I'd function better.
Right? And it's never fucking ending. It's never ending.
It just isn't.
And people continuously doing the same shit over and over. It's the very definition of fucking insanity, live in it. And I'm just like, what?
Yeah. Well, and it just makes me want to hide. It seems like it's more and more and more and more and more. And I'm sure that most of it is just the fact that it's more and more like in our face because of social media and the interwebs and stuff like that, right? I'm pretty sure that that's why it seems like it's more and more. I do feel that the pandemic really put people in a space where a lot of people have stopped thinking outside of themselves. Like, because of the isolation, I think people just became very self-thought, especially within the United States, where nobody even wanted to wear a mask, but everybody's going to scream on you scream in your face on the road, right? So I do feel like certain situations have made stuff worse, yet I think that a lot of it is the fact that it's just so in our face now because of the internet. And yet it's just like, and part of me goes, it's late stage capitalism, but the rest of it is like, it's ending. Like, to me, it looks like everything is just coming to its boil point, but it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I can't even watch trauma anymore. Like, if something comes across that's trauma, I have to back out. Like, I can't even listen, can't even do it anymore, because it's just never ending anymore.
It is never ending. And I understand. At the same time, I'm like, I'm sitting here in safe little Norway with the privileges I do have. My privileges even white people in United States probably don't know exist, right?
Yeah.
I can't look away.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's a real thing too. I may not
get exhausting, and sometimes you have to cry a lot. and then you're like, okay, I'm fine.
I did that this morning, actually. Went and collapsed in my bed and bawled for 10 minutes, and then went and took a shower.
Right.
What else are you going to do?
You don't have your own stresses in your own life, right? But that's, I'm thinking, okay, I can't, if I'm exhausted.
Yeah. And that's real too, and like, I mean, I don't consider myself white, yet I recognize the privilege that I have that comes with that, right? That comes with my skin tone. Whether my who I am has anything to do with my skin tone or not, the skin tone still gives me a huge amount of privilege. And utilizing that privilege for the benefit of others, you have to do it if you want to, on any level claim to be a member of community, right? So, you know, yeah, you have to, and I think to look at the world and be hurt by what's going on in the world, really the only response, if you have the capacity and the empathy to be hurt with what's going on, to feel pain over what's going on in the world, then the only real answer to that compassion and empathy is, how can I fix it? If I'm hurting over your pain, then I need to know how to fix your pain so that I'm no longer hurting over your pain, right? So I think that that's really, you know, I hide out. I just find other ways to do it. Like, I can no longer stand a front line, so I just go online, right? Um, you're right. We have to. And, for all the shit in the United States, it is still very much a privileged nation. Like, there is shit that we don't have that a lot of other nations have, right? And I will always say that, our governmental and our structure, I mean, we don't have the rights we think we do, right? Like, I'd like to have some real rights. And yet I also recognize that, well, there are entire states within the U.S. who would be deemed, to, I mean, literally are starving, right? There's entire nations and entire groups that, don't have running water. There are also, spaces within the U.S. that have such great wealth and privilege that it's incomparable to most places around the rest of the world, right? And so we have to recognize that and utilize that as well, right? From the safety of this space, where I live in a city that's not being bombed, I have to step up and protect those who are being bombed in whatever way that I possibly can, right? I think I'm glad that the people around me think that way, because I don't think I could live a life without having people like you that think that way, or like half the other people sitting in chat right now, who actually have that feeling of urgency for care for others, no matter how much they want to hide, no matter how hard it gets.
But in my eyes, that's a sort of a privilege too, because, and just hear me out, because I'm not making excuses. To me, I'm rationalizing why people don't, right? No, I grew up in a country that is very much more safe than the United States. It's not fear-based. Everything when I grew up was not fear-based. So we were in the woods, we were out playing, we went to the playground. My kids still do. I send them out 10 o'clock in the evening. I don't care. I know where they're at. It's fine. They can go to the store alone. We don't have, shooters filling our schools. There's so many things going on in the United States that we don't know how to even cognitively react to here. Hi, Rebel. And we all know what fear does to, well, not all, but I'm generalizing, sorry.
Anyway, it's okay.
What fear does to a child's mind is stun it, right? So you stun development.
Yeah.
And when you stun development, and that's a constant stun, because as you grow up, there is new fears, and one fear take over the other fear, right? Now you're going to hell, you're going, someone's going to shoot you, you can't do this, you can't do the other. And I'm just thinking, with a nation that grew up like the fears I see and hear people in the United States are growing up with, I'm thinking I'm exhausted for them. All of them. I'm not talking just one group. I'm meaning everyone.
Yeah.
Because it's everyone.
That is true. That is true. I mean, I'm terrified.
And now now I'm expecting these traumatized people to look at their neighbors or the county over, or let alone another country, and find empathy when they themselves are surviving. And it's not like surviving because you didn't have food. Some will do that, but what I'm talking about is the cognitive survival, right? It's survival in in their own fear, because they have to fear everything around them.
That's true. That's very true. And it is something that I thank you for bringing that up. It is something that very many of us, and I mean, I see it and I acknowledge it frequently, and yet still don't see it and acknowledge it in self, right? Like, and it's still hard to see and acknowledge that it is true that, we're not, I mean, we're not all living in starvation space. I mean, I understand the space. I've lived in that space. Like, I'm not currently living in that space. Um, uh, well, we're not all living in that kind of a space. We still are all living. I mean, our children do fucking shooter drills at school. Our children are terrified to go to school. Again, you can't even go to a mall or a movie theater anymore without worrying that somebody's going to come in and harm. I don't leave my home because it's too terrifying. Speaking of, my child is calling me. Give me just a second. Hey, sugar, I'm actually in the middle of a live. I'm trying to get to a point that I can pause it, and I'll come grab you, okay?
If you take like 30, that's fine.
Are you in the office?
Yeah, but I can go back to class.
Go ahead and stay in the office. I'll be there in a minute or two, okay?
When I get home, I just kind of want to lay down. So.
That's fine. That's fine, baby. I love you. I'll be there in a couple. I'll be there in a couple. Love you. Bye.
For the past months or so,
I have to run and pick up my kid. He got sick at school. I am going to start the live again, though, in probably 20 minutes tops, because it's just down the road. And I would love to continue this conversation, because it's a really good conversation that we need to be having more across society anyways. So I would love to continue it, and I'll send to you as well. He's moved in, and it's been really hard because of what was going on, and his other parent was not taking care of him well. And so we're trying to make sure that he's doing better, but with all of it, he's just been really having a hard time. So, but I will be back in like 20 minutes, everybody, to you and YouTube as well. And I'll send to you Fables, because I want to talk to you again. So much love, everybody. It was really good to see everybody who's in here. I'll make sure and I hit everybody up in the send too, and I'll be right back. Bye. Be right back, YouTube. Okay.